The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Catherine Middleton walked slowly through the ancient corridors. Her footsteps echoed softly against the stone walls, each step carrying the weight of a destiny she never fully imagined when she first met Prince William at university. The castle felt different today, somehow more alive with whispered conversations and hurried preparations that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Catherine paused before a massive portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, the woman who had become like a grandmother to her over the years. The painted eyes seemed to watch her with a mixture of wisdom and understanding, as if the late queen knew this moment would come. Catherine remembered their private conversations in the palace gardens, where the queen had gently prepared her for the responsibilities that would one day rest on her shoulders. The weight of tradition pressed down on her as she continued through the castle. Servants bowed respectfully as she passed, their faces showing a reverence that still felt strange to her. She was no longer just Kate Middleton from Bucklebury, the girl who had worked for her parents' party planning business. She was the Princess of Wales, and soon she would be something even greater. In the distance, she could hear the sound of construction crews working on the preparations for Westminster Abbey. The coronation was still weeks away, but every detail had to be perfect. The same abbey where William's grandmother had been crowned over 70 years ago would soon witness another historic moment. Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach as she thought about the millions of people who would be watching, both in person and around the world. As she entered her private study, Catherine found William standing by the window, looking out at the gardens where their children often played. His shoulders were tense, and she could see the strain of recent months written in the lines around his eyes. The transition from being heir to the throne to actually becoming king had been more challenging than either of them had expected. William turned as she entered, and his face softened into the smile that had first captured her heart at St. Andrew's University. But there was something different in his expression today, something that spoke of momentous decisions and changes that would affect not just their family, but the entire nation. "The Prime Minister called this morning," William said quietly, his voice carrying the formal tone he had adopted since becoming king. "The final preparations are being made. The Archbishop of Canterbury confirmed that everything is ready for the ceremony." Catherine nodded, feeling her heart rate quicken. They had discussed this moment countless times, but now that it was actually happening, it felt surreal. She thought about her parents who had built their business from nothing and raised their children to work hard and stay grounded. They had watched their daughter transform from a university student into a global icon, always supporting her but never quite believing how far she had come. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock that had belonged to previous monarchs. Catherine walked to her desk, where thick folders contained briefings about constitutional law, Commonwealth relations, and royal protocols. She had studied these documents for years, preparing for this moment, but the reality of actually becoming queen still felt overwhelming. Through the window, she could see tourists gathering outside the castle gates, many holding cameras and hoping for a glimpse of the royal family. Their excitement was palpable even from this distance, and Catherine realized that she was about to become the focus of their hopes and dreams for the monarchy's future. William approached her and gently took her hands in his. His touch was warm and reassuring, grounding her in the moment. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, though they both knew there was no turning back now. Catherine looked into his eyes and saw not just her husband, but the king who had chosen her to stand beside him as they led the nation into a new era. She thought about their children, who would grow up watching their mother serve as queen, and the example she wanted to set for them. "I've been preparing for this my entire adult life," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "From the moment I said yes to your proposal, I knew this day would come." As afternoon approached, Catherine made her way to the nursery where their children were having lunch with their nanny. The sight of them laughing and playing without a care in the world reminded her of what was truly important. They were still just children, but they too would soon have to adjust to their mother holding the highest position in the land. The palace staff had noticed subtle changes in how they addressed Catherine over the past few weeks. The transition from Your Royal Highness to preparing for Your Majesty represented more than just a change in title. It symbolized a fundamental shift in her role and responsibilities. As evening fell, Catherine stood once again at her window, watching the lights of London twinkle in the distance. Somewhere out there, millions of people were going about their daily lives, unaware that in just a few weeks their world would change forever. She would no longer be just the Princess of Wales, beloved though that role had been. She would be their queen, responsible for upholding traditions that stretched back over 1,000 years while also leading the monarchy into the modern age. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. But Catherine knew there was no other path she would choose. This was her destiny, and she was ready to embrace it completely. The ancient walls of Westminster Abbey had witnessed countless historic moments, but today felt different from any coronation in recent memory. Catherine stood in the private chamber adjacent to the main abbey, surrounded by ladies-in-waiting who moved with practiced precision as they made final adjustments to her coronation gown. The dress, designed by the same team that had created her wedding gown, incorporated symbols from all 4 nations of the United Kingdom, each stitch telling a story of unity and tradition. Catherine caught her reflection in the ornate mirror and barely recognized herself. The woman looking back wore the expression of someone ready to accept a destiny that would change her life forever. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo that would properly support the weight of the crown, and around her neck hung pearls that had once belonged to Queen Elizabeth II, a final gift from the beloved monarch. Outside the chamber, she could hear the sound of thousands of guests taking their seats in the abbey. World leaders, members of the Commonwealth, and representatives from every corner of British society had gathered to witness this historic moment. The guest list read like a who's who of global politics and royalty, but Catherine knew that the most important people watching would be her own family and the millions of ordinary citizens following the ceremony on television. Her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, had arrived earlier that morning, their faces showing a mixture of pride and disbelief that their daughter was about to become queen. Catherine remembered her mother's words from the night before. "You've always been a queen to us, darling, but now the whole world will see what we've always known." The sound of organ music drifted through the stone walls as the ceremony began in earnest. Catherine knew that at this very moment, William was already seated on the throne, having completed his own coronation earlier in the ceremony. The tradition called for the king to be crowned first, followed by his queen consort, a protocol that stretched back centuries. Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby appeared at the chamber door, his ceremonial robes flowing behind him as he prepared to escort Catherine to the altar. His kind eyes met hers, and he offered a reassuring smile. "Your Majesty," he said, using the title that would soon become official, "it is time." The procession began slowly, with Catherine walking behind pages carrying the train of her gown. Each step toward the altar felt momentous, as if she were walking through history itself. The abbey was filled to capacity, with every seat occupied by someone significant in British society or international relations. As she moved down the aisle, Catherine could see familiar faces among the congregation, celebrities who had become friends over the years, politicians she had worked with on various charitable causes, and fellow royals from around the world who had come to witness this historic moment. The music swelled as she approached the altar, where William waited in his ceremonial robes, the new crown already resting on his head. Their eyes met across the sacred space, and for a moment, it felt like they were the only 2 people in the abbey. He gave her the slightest nod, a private signal of encouragement that only she would recognize. As Catherine reached the altar, she could see the St. Edward's chair, where she would soon be seated for the most solemn part of the ceremony. The chair had been used for coronation since 1308, and the thought of joining that long line of monarchs was both humbling and awe-inspiring. She thought briefly of all the queens who had sat in that chair before her, each facing their own challenges and triumphs. The Archbishop began the ancient words of the coronation service, his voice carrying clearly through the abbey's perfect acoustics. The ceremony followed traditions that had been refined over centuries, each element carrying deep symbolic meaning. When it came time for Catherine to take her oath, her voice rang out clear and strong, promising to serve the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth with dedication and integrity. The moment arrived for the anointing with holy oil, a part of the ceremony so sacred that it was shielded from public view by a golden canopy. As the oil touched her forehead, Catherine felt a profound sense of transformation, as if she were leaving her old life behind and stepping into a new existence as queen. The weight of the queen consort's crown, as it was placed upon her head, was both literal and metaphorical. The physical weight reminded her of the burden of responsibility she was accepting, while the symbolic weight represented the expectations of an entire nation. The crown, specially created for this occasion, incorporated diamonds from the crown jewels and had been designed to reflect both tradition and Catherine's own personal style. As the final blessing was pronounced over her, Catherine felt a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. The little girl who had dreamed of fairy tales had just become part of the greatest fairy tale of all, but she knew that unlike the stories, this was just the beginning of her real work. The congregation erupted in a carefully orchestrated "God Save the Queen," their voices rising to the ancient rafters of Westminster Abbey. Catherine stood beside William, now officially Queen Catherine, and looked out at the assembled crowd. She could see tears in her mother's eyes, pride in her father's face, and hope in the expressions of countless others who were looking to her and William to lead them into the future. As they prepared to leave the Abbey for the traditional procession back to Buckingham Palace, Catherine took one last look around the sacred space. This was where her transformation had been completed, where Catherine Middleton had officially become Queen Catherine. The woman who walked out of Westminster Abbey would be forever different from the one who had walked in, carrying with her the hopes and dreams of millions of people who were counting on her to serve them well. The golden state coach lurched slightly as it began its journey from Westminster Abbey back to Buckingham Palace, and Catherine gripped the side rail to steady herself. The ornate carriage, built in 1762, had carried monarchs for over 2 centuries, but riding in it as the newly crowned queen felt surreal. Through the bulletproof glass windows, she could see thousands upon thousands of people lining the streets, their faces pressed against barriers as they strained to catch a glimpse of their new queen. William sat beside her, his own crown now firmly in place, and reached over to squeeze her hand gently. The weight of both their crowns made turning their heads difficult, but Catherine managed to look at him with wonder. Just hours ago, they had been Prince and Princess of Wales. Now they were King and Queen, the constitutional heads of state for the United Kingdom and 15 other Commonwealth realms. The crowds along the Mall were incredible, stretching as far as Catherine could see in both directions. People had camped overnight to secure the best viewing spots, and many waved small Union Jack flags enthusiastically as the coach passed. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, their faces painted with red, white, and blue, while elderly spectators watched with tears streaming down their cheeks, perhaps remembering Queen Elizabeth II's coronation decades earlier. Catherine had practiced the royal wave countless times over the years, but doing it while wearing the queen consort's crown added a new dimension to the experience. She had to move carefully and deliberately, aware that every gesture was being photographed and filmed by hundreds of cameras positioned along the route. The crown felt secure on her head, held in place by expert fittings, but she was constantly aware of its presence. Through the carriage window, she could see the BBC's commentary team positioned at various points along the route, describing the scene to millions of viewers around the world. Catherine knew that her parents were probably watching at home, still hardly believing that their daughter had just become Queen of England. The thought of them made her smile naturally, and the crowd responded with increased cheering as they caught sight of her expression. The procession moved slowly through London's historic streets, giving everyone a chance to see the newly crowned monarchs. Catherine noticed a group of schoolchildren who had made a banner reading, "Welcome Queen Catherine," their teacher helping them hold it up as the coach approached. She made sure to wave directly at them, and their excited squeals were audible even through the carriage's thick walls. As they passed Trafalgar Square, Catherine could see the massive crowds that had gathered around Nelson's column. Giant screens had been set up throughout London to broadcast the ceremony to those who couldn't get tickets to line the procession route. The atmosphere was festive and celebratory, with people from all walks of life united in marking this historic moment. Military bands positioned along the route played "God Save the Queen" as the state coach passed, their music adding to the pageantry of the occasion. The household cavalry rode alongside the carriage, their ceremonial uniforms and polished boots gleaming in the afternoon sun. Catherine marveled at the precision of their formation and the way their horses seemed to dance in time with the music. Buckingham Palace came into view as they turned the final corner, its familiar facade now taking on new meaning for Catherine. This would be her primary residence as queen, the place where she would hold audiences with prime ministers, meet with foreign dignitaries, and host state banquets for visiting heads of state. The balcony where she would soon appear had been the site of countless historic moments, from victory celebrations to royal weddings. The crowds in front of the palace were the largest yet, with an estimated 100,000 people packed into the area around the Victoria Memorial. They had been waiting for hours for this moment, when the newly crowned king and queen would appear on the famous balcony to acknowledge their subjects. The anticipation was electric, with waves of cheering rolling through the crowd as word spread that the royal couple had arrived. As the state coach passed through the palace gates, Catherine felt a mixture of relief and excitement. The formal part of the day was nearly over, but she knew that stepping onto that balcony would be one of the most significant moments of her life. It would be her first public appearance as queen, the moment when she would be officially presented to the nation she now served. Inside the palace, Catherine was quickly escorted to a private room where her ladies-in-waiting helped her freshen up after the long carriage ride. The crown was carefully adjusted, and her makeup was touched up before the crucial balcony appearance. Through the windows, she could hear the crowd outside chanting, "We want the Queen! We want the Queen!" with increasing enthusiasm. William appeared at her side, having undergone his own quick preparations. His crown had been adjusted as well, and his ceremonial robes had been straightened after the carriage journey. Together they walked toward the famous balcony, their footsteps echoing through the palace corridors where so many monarchs had walked before them. As they approached the balcony doors, Catherine could hear the roar of the crowd outside growing louder. Palace officials made final checks of their appearance, ensuring that everything was perfect for the photographs that would appear in newspapers around the world the next day. The moment was almost here when she would step onto that balcony not as Princess Catherine, but as Queen Catherine. The doors to the balcony opened, and suddenly Catherine was standing before the largest crowd she had ever seen. The noise was overwhelming, a wave of cheering and applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. She and William stepped forward together, and the crowd's response was immediate and thunderous. Looking out over the sea of faces, Catherine felt a profound sense of responsibility settling over her. These were her people now, and she was their queen. The little girl who had once dreamed of fairy tales was now living in one, but she understood that the real work was just beginning. The moment Catherine stepped onto the Buckingham Palace balcony, the roar from the crowd below was unlike anything she had ever experienced. 100,000 voices united in celebration, their cheers echoing off the palace walls and rolling across St. James's Park like thunder. She stood beside William, both of them still wearing their coronation crowns, and felt the full weight of what had just occurred settle upon her shoulders. William raised his hand to acknowledge the crowd, and Catherine followed suit with the wave she had perfected over years of royal engagements. But this wave felt different. Every previous time she had stood on this balcony, she had been Princess Catherine, the wife of the heir to the throne. Now she was Queen Catherine, and the crowd knew it. Their enthusiasm was electric, with Union Jack flags waving so vigorously they created a sea of red, white, and blue motion below. The royal children appeared next to them on the balcony, having been brought up by their nannies for this historic moment. Catherine looked down at her eldest child, who gazed up at her with wide eyes, clearly overwhelmed by the noise and spectacle. She reached down to place a reassuring hand on the child's shoulder, a gesture that was captured by thousands of cameras and would appear on front pages around the world the next morning. Behind them, other members of the royal family began to file onto the balcony. Catherine's parents-in-law took their positions, followed by her own parents, who still seemed to be in shock at finding themselves at the center of such a momentous occasion. Michael Middleton stood straight and proud, while Carol dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, clearly emotional at seeing her daughter crowned queen. The crowd's chanting grew more organized, with clear calls of "Long live the Queen" rising above the general cheering. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes as she realized these people were chanting for her. After years of being welcomed by the British public as Princess Catherine, she was now being celebrated as their queen, the Acceptance and enthusiasm of the crowd was both humbling and inspiring. Television cameras positioned at various angles captured every moment of the balcony appearance. Catherine knew that these images were being broadcast live to an estimated 2 billion people around the world, making this one of the most watched events in television history. The thought of so many people watching her every move was both thrilling and terrifying. A flypast by the Royal Air Force began to approach from the distance, the distinctive sound of jet engines adding to the excitement of the moment. Catherine looked up to see the red arrows leading a formation of historic and modern aircraft across the London sky. The crowd's attention split between the new queen on the balcony and the spectacular aerial display above, creating a perfect culmination to the day's celebrations. As the aircraft passed directly overhead, trailing red, white, and blue smoke across the sky, Catherine felt a surge of patriotic pride that surprised her with its intensity. She had always loved Britain, but standing there as queen, watching the country celebrate around her, she felt a deeper connection to the land and people she now served than ever before. The balcony appearance traditionally lasted only a few minutes, but each second felt significant to Catherine. She tried to make eye contact with as many people in the crowd as possible, knowing that for many of them, this would be the closest they would ever come to their queen. Children were lifted high on parents' shoulders, elderly people wiped away tears, and young couples took selfies with the palace balcony in the background. When it came time to return inside, Catherine took one last look at the massive crowd below. The sight would stay with her forever, thousands upon thousands of her subjects united in celebration of her coronation. As she turned to walk back through the balcony doors, she caught William's eye and saw her own emotions reflected in his expression. They had crossed a threshold together and there was no going back. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was electric with excitement and relief that the ceremony had gone perfectly. Palace staff, who had worked for months to ensure every detail was flawless, finally allowed themselves to smile and congratulate each other. Catherine was immediately surrounded by well-wishers, from family members to government officials who had attended the ceremony. The Prime Minister approached Catherine with a deep bow, the first time she had been greeted in this formal manner as Queen. "Your Majesty," he said, "on behalf of the government and the people of the United Kingdom, may I offer our heartfelt congratulations on your coronation. The ceremony was magnificent, and the country is united in celebration of this historic day." Catherine accepted his congratulations graciously, already settling into the formal responses that would become second nature in her new role. She could see the genuine emotion in his eyes as he spoke, and realized that even the most powerful political figures in the country were moved by the significance of what had just occurred. As the immediate excitement began to settle, Catherine found herself with a few quiet moments to reflect on what had just happened. She had entered Westminster Abbey that morning as Princess Catherine and emerged as Queen Catherine. The transformation was complete, but she knew that the real work of being queen was just beginning. The evening would bring a state banquet for the visiting dignitaries who had attended the coronation, followed by weeks of celebration events throughout the Commonwealth. But for now, Catherine allowed herself a moment to absorb the magnitude of what had occurred. She was Queen of England, Queen of the United Kingdom, head of the Commonwealth, and defender of the faith. Looking around at the ancient palace that was now her home, Catherine felt a profound sense of purpose settling over her. The crowds outside were still celebrating, their voices carrying through the palace windows, and she knew that their enthusiasm and support would sustain her through the challenges that lay ahead in her reign as queen. The state banqueting hall at Buckingham Palace had been transformed into a scene of unparalleled elegance for the coronation dinner. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables set with the finest china, each place setting representing centuries of royal tradition. Catherine, now officially Queen Catherine, sat at the head table beside William, still adjusting to the formal address of Your Majesty that accompanied every interaction. The guest list read like a gathering of the world's most influential people. Presidents, prime ministers, monarchs from other nations, and leaders from across the Commonwealth had come to celebrate this historic moment. Catherine looked around the room and marveled at how her life had led to this point, hosting dinner for some of the most powerful people on earth. The conversation at dinner was a delicate balance of congratulations, diplomatic discussions, and personal connections. Catherine found herself engaged in discussions about everything from climate change initiatives to cultural exchange programs, topics that would become central to her role as queen. She realized that every conversation was now an opportunity to advance Britain's interests and strengthen relationships with other nations across the table. She could see her parents trying to absorb the surreal nature of their situation. Michael and Carol Middleton, who had built their party planning business from scratch, were now dining with kings and queens, presidents and prime ministers. Their presence at the head table symbolized the modern nature of Catherine's path to the throne, representing the meritocratic values that she hoped to bring to her reign. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who had performed the coronation ceremony earlier that day, offered a blessing before the meal. His words about service, duty, and the responsibility of leadership resonated deeply with Catherine as she began to fully understand the magnitude of her new role. The weight of the crown she had worn earlier was nothing compared to the weight of expectation she now carried. As the evening progressed, Catherine moved gracefully from table to table, engaging with guests from around the world. Each conversation was an opportunity to learn about global challenges and opportunities, and she found herself energized by the discussions. The Queen of Sweden shared insights about environmental initiatives, while the President of Ghana spoke passionately about education programs that Catherine hoped to support through royal patronages. William remained close by throughout the evening, and Catherine could see how naturally he had settled into his role as king. Their partnership, which had sustained them through years of preparation, was now more important than ever as they navigated their new responsibilities together. The easy communication between them, developed over years of marriage, would be crucial in their joint leadership of the monarchy. The evening's speeches began with the Prime Minister offering formal congratulations on behalf of the British people. His words about Catherine's dedication to charitable causes and her natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life painted a picture of a queen who would bring both tradition and innovation to her role. The assembled guests responded with enthusiastic applause that echoed through the grand hall. When it came time for William to speak as the newly crowned king, his words focused on the partnership he and Catherine would bring to their reign. He spoke about her intelligence, compassion, and unwavering commitment to service, describing her as the perfect queen for a modern Britain. Catherine felt her cheeks warm with emotion as he spoke, touched by his public recognition of their journey together. The evening also included cultural performances that showcased the diversity of the Commonwealth. Musicians from different nations performed pieces that represented the global reach of the institutions Catherine now led. As she watched a young violinist from Canada perform alongside a traditional drummer from Nigeria, she felt the weight of representing such a diverse and dynamic community of nations. During a quiet moment between courses, Catherine's mother leaned over and whispered, "I still can't believe this is real. My little girl is Queen of England." The comment made Catherine smile, reminding her that despite all the ceremony and formality, she was still the same person who had grown up in Berkshire and fallen in love with a prince at university. As the formal part of the evening concluded, guests moved to the palace's reception rooms for continued celebration. Catherine found herself in smaller groups now, having more intimate conversations about the challenges facing the modern world. A conversation with the Prime Minister of New Zealand about climate change resilience gave her insights into issues she would need to address as head of the Commonwealth. The evening slowly wound down as international guests began to depart for their respective countries. Each farewell was accompanied by invitations for future visits and promises of continued cooperation between nations. Catherine realized that her calendar would be filled with state visits, diplomatic receptions, and international travel as she worked to strengthen Britain's relationships around the world. As the last guests departed, Catherine found herself alone with William in the same room where the evening had begun. The tables had been cleared, the chandeliers dimmed, and the palace staff had efficiently restored the room to its usual state. But the significance of what had occurred would linger far beyond this single evening. Standing in the quiet room, Catherine reflected on the transformation that had taken place not just that day, but over the years leading up to this moment. She thought about the young woman who had met Prince William at university, never imagining that she would one day be queen. The journey had been long and sometimes challenging, but it had prepared her for this moment. Looking ahead, Catherine knew that her reign would be defined not by the ceremony and pageantry of Coronation Day, but by the work she would do in service to the British people and the Commonwealth. The crown was just a symbol. The real measure of her success would be how effectively she could use her position to make a positive difference in the world. As she and William prepared to retire for the evening, Catherine took one last look around the room where she had hosted her first official event as queen. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight had been perfect, a celebration worthy of the historic moment when Catherine Middleton officially became Queen Catherine. The morning after her coronation, Catherine woke in the Queen's private chambers at Buckingham Palace to find newspapers from around the world spread across her breakfast table. Headlines in dozens of languages proclaimed the success of the previous day's ceremony, with photographs of her coronation dominating front pages from London to Sydney to Toronto. The reality of her new status hit her anew, as she saw herself described as Queen Catherine in print for the first time. The first official engagement of her reign was scheduled for that very morning, a visit to a children's hospital in East London that she had supported as a patron for several years. But now her visit would carry different weight. She was no longer arriving as the Princess of Wales supporting a charitable cause. She was coming as the Queen, bringing the full authority and attention of the monarchy to the work being done there. Catherine's lady-in-waiting helped her choose an outfit that struck the right balance between regal dignity and approachable warmth. The pale blue dress she selected was elegant but not ostentatious, appropriate for a hospital setting, while still reflecting her new status. A simple string of pearls and modest earrings completed the look, along with a small brooch that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II. The journey through London's East End revealed a city still celebrating the previous day's events. Union Jack bunting hung from buildings, and many shops displayed photographs of the new king and queen in their windows. Children pressed against the windows of their schools to wave as the royal convoy passed, their teachers having organized impromptu celebrations to mark the historic moment. At the hospital, Catherine was greeted by staff members who had worked with her for years, but now addressed her with the formal protocols required for a reigning queen. The head of pediatrics, Dr. Sarah Williams, had known Catherine since her early days as a royal patron, but today she curtsied deeply and addressed her as Your Majesty for the first time. As Catherine walked through the hospital corridors, she could see the impact her new status had on everyone around her. Nurses stopped their work to curtsy as she passed. Parents of young patients looked at her with a mixture of awe and gratitude, and the children themselves seemed to sense that something special was happening, even if they didn't fully understand what it meant. In the cancer ward, Catherine spent time with a young boy named Thomas who had been battling leukemia for over a year. His mother explained that Thomas had watched the coronation ceremony from his hospital bed the day before, cheering when Catherine was crowned queen. As Catherine sat beside his bed, Thomas looked up at her with wonder and said, "You're really the queen now, aren't you?" The simple question from the 8-year-old boy somehow captured the magnitude of her transformation better than any newspaper headline. The visit to the children's cancer ward was particularly meaningful to Catherine, as it represented the continuity between her work as Princess of Wales and her new role as queen. The charitable causes that had been close to her heart would remain central to her reign, but now she would have even greater resources and influence to support them. During a meeting with the hospital's senior staff, Catherine learned about funding challenges that threatened to reduce services for young patients. As queen, she now had the ability to convene meetings with government ministers, corporate leaders, and international donors in ways that could make a real difference. The conversation gave her a clear example of how her new position could translate into tangible benefits for causes she cared about. After leaving the hospital, Catherine's next stop was a brief visit to a local primary school that had organized a celebration of the coronation. The children had spent weeks preparing artwork and performances to mark the historic day, and their enthusiasm was infectious. As Catherine toured their displays, she was struck by how the monarchy served as a focal point for community celebration and national pride. One young girl presented Catherine with a drawing she had made of the coronation ceremony, showing Catherine and William wearing their crowns with the words "Our New Queen," written in careful primary school handwriting. Catherine accepted the drawing with genuine emotion, knowing that it represented the hopes and dreams of a new generation who would grow up during her reign. The school visit concluded with a performance by the children's choir, who sang God Save the Queen with such enthusiasm that several teachers were moved to tears. Catherine found herself deeply touched by their innocence and joy, reminding her that her role as queen was about serving not just the nation as a whole, but each individual citizen, from the youngest child to the oldest pensioner. As her car pulled away from the school, Catherine reflected on how different these familiar activities felt now that she was queen. The same charitable work, the same community engagement, the same interactions with ordinary people, but all infused with new meaning and responsibility. She was no longer just supporting these causes. She was leading them as the head of state. The afternoon brought a return to Buckingham Palace for her first official audience as Queen with the Prime Minister. The weekly meetings between monarch and Prime Minister were a cornerstone of the British constitutional system, and Catherine had observed many such meetings during her years of preparation. But now she would be the one receiving the briefings on government policy and offering her perspective on national issues. The Prime Minister arrived precisely on time, and Catherine received him in the same room where Queen Elizabeth II had conducted these meetings for decades. The conversation covered everything from domestic policy challenges to international relations, and Catherine found herself drawing on years of preparation and study to engage meaningfully with complex issues of governance. As the day drew to a close, Catherine stood once again at the window of her private study, looking out over the gardens of Buckingham Palace. The same view that had seemed overwhelming just days before now felt like home. She was no longer Princess Catherine looking forward to her destiny. She was Queen Catherine, beginning the work that would define her reign. The transformation was complete, but Catherine understood that becoming queen was not a destination, but the beginning of a journey. Every day would bring new challenges and opportunities to serve her people, and she was ready to embrace them all with the same dedication and grace that had brought her to this historic moment. 3 months had passed since Catherine's coronation, and the reality of being queen had settled into a rhythm that felt both natural and extraordinary. She sat in her private office at Windsor Castle, reviewing correspondence from around the Commonwealth, each letter representing a connection between the Crown and citizens who looked to her for leadership and inspiration. The Morning Post had brought messages from school children in Australia, veterans in Canada, and community leaders in Jamaica, all expressing their hopes for her reign. The weight of representation had become clearer to Catherine with each passing day. She was not just Queen of the United Kingdom. She was Queen of 15 other realms and head of the Commonwealth, representing nearly a quarter of the world's population. The responsibility was immense, but she had discovered that it was also deeply fulfilling in ways she had never anticipated. Her private secretary knocked gently on the door before entering with the day's schedule. "Your Majesty, the car will be ready in 30 minutes for your visit to the Veterans Hospital. The Prime Minister has also requested a brief audience this afternoon regarding the upcoming Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting." Catherine nodded, appreciating how naturally the formal address had become part of her daily life. The transition from Your Royal Highness to Your Majesty had been seamless, helped by the respect and affection she had built with palace staff over the years. They had watched her grow from a nervous young woman into a confident queen, and their support had been invaluable during the adjustment period. The visit to the Veterans Hospital was particularly meaningful to Catherine, as military welfare had become one of her key areas of focus since the coronation. As she walked through the rehabilitation ward, speaking with soldiers recovering from injuries sustained in service to the Crown, she felt the full weight of her constitutional role as the ultimate authority, to whom these brave men and women had sworn their oath of allegiance. One elderly veteran, who had served in conflicts spanning 4 decades, struggled to stand as Catherine approached his bedside. She gently encouraged him to remain seated, but he insisted on showing proper respect to his queen. "Your Majesty," he said with emotion thick in his voice, "I've served under 3 monarchs in my time, and I want you to know that your coronation gave me hope that the best of British values will continue for generations to come." The conversation with the veteran reminded Catherine of a crucial truth about her role. She was a living symbol of continuity and stability in an ever-changing world. People looked to the monarchy not just for ceremony and tradition, but for reassurance that certain values and principles would endure regardless of political changes or social upheaval. After the hospital visit, Catherine returned to Buckingham Palace for her audience with the Prime Minister. These weekly meetings had become one of her favorite aspects of being queen, offering her insights into the complex challenges facing the government and opportunities to offer perspective drawn from her unique position above party politics. "Your Majesty," the Prime Minister began, "I wanted to brief you personally on the upcoming Commonwealth meeting. Several member nations have indicated they would like to discuss strengthening trade relationships, and your presence at the opening ceremony will be crucial in setting the right tone for the discussions." Catherine listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about the economic implications of various proposals and the potential impact on smaller Commonwealth nations. She had spent considerable time studying international relations since her coronation, understanding that her role required her to be well informed about global affairs, even though she remained above partisan politics. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine found herself in the palace gardens with her children, who had adapted remarkably well to their mother's new status. They still called her Mummy in private moments, providing a grounding normalcy that balanced the formality of her public role. Watching them play among the same gardens where she had walked during her early days as Princess of Wales, Catherine reflected on how much had changed and how much had remained the same. The evening brought a small private dinner with William, a rare moment when they could speak openly about the challenges and rewards of their new roles. Over dinner, they discussed upcoming state visits, charitable initiatives they wanted to launch, and their hopes for how the monarchy could evolve to meet the needs of the 21st century. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of our old life?" William asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. Catherine considered the question carefully. "I miss certain aspects of privacy and spontaneity," she replied, "but I've never felt more purposeful or useful. Every day brings opportunities to make a real difference in people's lives, and that's incredibly fulfilling." As they talked, Catherine realized that her transformation into queen had been more gradual and natural than she had expected. The person she had become through years of royal duties and preparation had been well suited for the role she now held. The nervous young woman who had once worried about making mistakes had evolved into a confident leader, comfortable with both the ceremonial and substantive aspects of being queen. Later that evening, Catherine stood once more at her office window, but this time her view encompassed not just the palace gardens, but the city of London beyond, and symbolically the entire realm she now served. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, each one representing lives that were in some small way touched by her role as queen. She thought about the little girl who had once dreamed of fairy tales, never imagining that she would one day be living in the greatest fairy tale of all. But unlike the stories that ended with happily ever after, Catherine understood that her real story was just beginning. Every day brought new opportunities to serve, to lead, and to represent the best values of the nation and commonwealth she loved. The coronation had been a moment of transformation, but the months that followed had proven that being queen was not about a single moment of change, but about the daily choice to serve others with dignity, compassion, and unwavering commitment. As she prepared for bed in apartments that had housed queens for centuries, Catherine felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. She was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but Catherine faced them with confidence, knowing that she had the support of her family, the dedication of her staff, and most importantly, the love and respect of the people she was privileged to serve as their queen. The transformation was complete, but the real work of her reign would continue for decades to come.